I remember looking down at my bruised arm. The thought that kept cycling through my head was my insane mother. In-law assaulted me and tried to stab me, so I'm ruining her life. It sounded like a line from a bad screenplay, but it was the only thing that gave me focus as the police lights spun outside the window. Before yesterday, my life had been predictable, perfectly secured, and totally managed just the way I liked it. As a 32-year-old digital security analyst, I prided myself on my ability to see patterns, anticipate threats, and lock down vulnerabilities. I had systems for everything, from my meticulously organized pantry to the biometric lock on my office laptop. Yet, I had missed the most obvious, glaring threat right inside my own home, nestled in the arms of the man I loved. The problem, or at least the one I thought I was solving, was Daniel's mother, Millicent. She hated me from the first moment we met 3 years ago. The reason was blunt and simple: I am Asian. I remember that first dinner. The restaurant was upscale, candlelit, and quiet. Daniel and I were celebrating 6 months of dating, and I was nervous but excited to meet his mother, who had flown in from out of state. Millicent, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a tightly controlled perm, looked me up and down like I was an abstract sculpture she couldn't quite appreciate. When Daniel excused himself to get wine, she leaned across the table. "I hope you are not going to be ordering the special," she said, her voice dry and brittle. I frowned. "The special tonight is risotto." "I was considering it." "Oh, I just meant—" "I hope you remembered to leave your dog at home," she said, managing to hold a perfectly straight face. "I never understood that problem with you people. So much wasted protein." The blood drained from my face. I sat there, paralyzed, trying to figure out if I had heard that correctly. It was the oldest, cheapest, most vile racist joke in the book. It was an immediate, unprovoked assault. When Daniel returned, he saw my face and Millicent's smirk. He didn't ask what happened. He just laughed, a high, nervous, apologetic sound that bounced off the silence. "Oh, Mom," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You are just impossible." That was the moment I should have left. That was the security breach I should have patched immediately. But Daniel had already captured my heart with his easy charm and unwavering attention. He was built like a gym instructor, funny, and relentlessly supportive of my career. I loved him, so I rationalized it. I minimized the joke, believing Daniel's impossible mother was a minor inconvenience, not a foundational threat. I was wrong, of course. The racist jokes didn't stop. They escalated, becoming more targeted and personal. She called me yellow constantly, did the squinty eye gesture when she thought Daniel wasn't looking, and mocked Chinese accents when talking about the Olympics. Then she progressed to political commentary. Once, during a family video call, she started acting out the Tiananmen Square massacre, complete with exaggerated sound effects and an offensive soldier uniform she'd apparently made out of a kitchen towel. Daniel just kept taking her side, nervously laughing it off, telling me she was just old-fashioned and that I should toughen up. After the Tiananmen incident, I gave him my first real ultimatum. "The kind that ends relationships, Daniel," I told him, sitting him down on the couch. "It's me or her. I will not tolerate that kind of malice disguised as humor in my life. You either never see your mother again, or we are done. Now." He looked at me with those big, earnest blue eyes, and after a dramatic 20-minute pause that felt like 3 hours, he chose me. "I choose you, Sam," he said, holding my hands. "You are the one I want to spend my life with. I will only visit her alone." For 1 whole year, Daniel kept his promise. He visited Millicent in her home state alone for long weekends. Our relationship flourished in the peace. We moved into a beautiful apartment together. I started to let my guard down. I felt safe. I started to believe in the fantasy he had created. Then he proposed. The proposal was perfect, meticulously planned, and entirely public. I was ecstatic. I had found the one exception to my rule, the person who was truly trustworthy. The wedding invitation argument started immediately. Daniel, now filled with the optimism of a fiancé, insisted we had to invite his mother. "It's my wedding, Sam," he pleaded. "She is my mother. She will behave." I refused. I was firm. The line had been drawn, and she would not cross it. My safety, both emotional and physical, depended on her exclusion. I thought the issue was settled. I thought my security perimeter was holding. I was convinced my judgment was right. I was profoundly wrong. Daniel went behind my back and sent her an invitation anyway. I found out the next morning when my phone chimed. It was a text from Millicent. Happy you invited me despite our misunderstandings. Never understood the problem with harmless jokes. Looking forward to celebrating with my son. I stared at the screen, the rage bubbling up from my stomach and settling behind my eyes. I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me, worse than any joke she could have told. Daniel had not only undermined me, he had lied directly to me. He had chosen the path of deceit and cowardice. When he came home from work, I was waiting. "We are going to her house," I demanded, standing rigid in the hallway. "Right now. We are going to settle this once and for all." The image of Millicent's condescending text message, "Happy you invited me despite our misunderstandings," was burned into my mind. I still remember the way the apartment looked, the low, orange glow of the evening sun slanting across the hardwood floor, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. That dust represented the perfect, false security of the life Daniel and I had built together. I had given him an ultimatum 1 year ago, believing I was securing our relationship by forcing her out. Now Daniel's lie felt like a physical violation, a failure of my own vigilance. I didn't yell when Daniel finally came home. Yelling would have been emotional, and I was past emotion. I was in analytical mode, cold and focused. She texted me. I stated flatly, holding up my phone so he could see the screen. "You sent her an invitation. Why did you lie?" Daniel's face instantly shifted into his panic mode, wide, earnest eyes, and a slow, sorrowful shake of the head. He was a master of the performance. "Sam, I'm so sorry," he began, trying to take my hand. I pulled it back. I didn't want to choose. She's my mother, and it's our wedding. I thought if I just sent it, quietly, she would show up, behave, and we could finally have peace. I thought I could solve the problem for us. "You thought you could solve the problem by undermining my fundamental boundary?" I asked. My voice sounded distant even to me. "By exposing me to her racism again, without my consent." The phrase, "without my consent," hung heavy in the air, a technical term I often used in my security work, now tragically relevant to my personal life. I realized Daniel was more committed to avoiding conflict than he was to protecting me. His loyalty was an illusion. My stubborn reliance on the idea that I could control the situation through ultimatums had failed. "We are going to her house now," I repeated, ignoring his excuses. "We will drive down tonight. We will tell her, together, that she is uninvited, and she will hear it from both of us. This is over, Daniel. No more running. No more lying." Daniel hated conflict. He hated facing his mother almost as much as I did. But he saw the absolute, uncompromising set of my jaw, the analytical coldness in my eyes that said there was no other option. He knew if he resisted, I would walk out right then. He reluctantly agreed, the look on his face suggesting I was being unreasonable and overly dramatic, but he got his jacket. The 2-hour drive to Millicent's house felt like driving into a fog. We barely spoke. I sat there, replaying every racist joke, every mocking comment, analyzing them for patterns, trying to find the vulnerability in her armor that I could exploit to finally get through to her. I wasn't seeking forgiveness. I was seeking absolute compliance. I wanted her to understand the finality of my decision. When we arrived, Millicent's demeanor was jarring. She opened the door, and instead of the usual sneer, she rushed forward and hugged me, a tight, theatrical embrace that smelled faintly of cheap perfume and cleaning supplies. "Oh, Sam, darling," she exclaimed, pulling back with a forced, manic smile. "I'm so glad you came. I'm so happy we finally worked past our little misunderstandings. Come in, come in." I pulled myself free of her grip, stepping past her into the brightly lit, immaculate living room. The room was aggressively normal, with heavy, traditional furniture and a meticulously maintained fireplace. "Millicent," I said, bypassing the pleasantries, "Daniel sent you an invitation without my permission. Did you know he went behind my back?" The question actually landed. Her theatrical smile faltered. Daniel, standing awkwardly behind me, paled. Millicent turned to her son, genuine shock replacing the fake warmth. "Daniel, is that true?" she asked, her voice dropping. He mumbled something unintelligible. The truth was out. Daniel had lied to both of us. He was a conflict coward, trying to manipulate two women into sharing a space in a moment that was deeply painful for one of them. For the next hour, I didn't let up. I meticulously explained, calmly and analytically, why her Jokes were not jokes. I spoke about the history of anti-Asian sentiment in this country. I detailed the specific feeling of being dehumanized when she mocked my culture or my looks. I laid out the data points of my emotional suffering, convinced that if I just presented the facts logically, she would finally concede. But I was talking to a wall. Millicent sat there, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the polished wood of her coffee table. She offered no apology, only defense. "They're just jokes, Sam. Nothing more. You are too sensitive," she insisted, shaking her head. I never understood the problem with harmless jokes. I have a right to my opinions. Daniel infuriatingly mostly took her side, muttering about how I needed to calm down and that this was just becoming dramatic. I looked from the manipulative mother to the weak son, and the last vestiges of hope I had for this family structure vanished. The fantasy was dead. I stood up from the antique chair. The fabric smelled faintly of mothballs and old dust. My voice was clear and final, cutting through the strained silence of the room. "If this is your attitude," I stated, looking Millicent directly in the eye, "then you are not invited. You will not be at my wedding. And if you show up, I will walk out. That is my final decision." And that's when she moved. The moment I delivered the final, non-negotiable decision. "If you show up, I will walk out." The air in Millicent's immaculate living room turned heavy, silent for only half a second. It was the calm before the physical storm. Then she moved. It wasn't a warning or a threat, it was an explosion. Millicent launched herself across the short distance separating us. I hadn't even finished turning toward the door. She moved with a speed and ferocity that completely belied her age and her stiff, traditional appearance. She was on my back before I could react, her weight slamming me against the heavy, scratchy wool rug that covered the hardwood floor. The sound was a loud, sickening thud that echoed in the quiet house. I hit the floor hard, the wind knocked instantly out of my lungs. My head connected with the wood with a dull, jolting impact. I gasped, disoriented, the scent of dust and cleaning supplies suddenly overwhelming. Millicent's bony fists were immediately pounding into my back and shoulders, fueled by a terrifying, high-pitched scream. "You will not ruin my baby boy's wedding," she shrieked, the words incoherent with rage and betrayal. "You yellow thing! You think you can take him from me?" The violence was shocking, total, and completely unexpected. I was a man who prided himself on vigilance, on anticipating threats, but I was utterly blindsided by this raw, physical attack. This wasn't a family drama anymore, it was an emergency. Daniel finally reacted. He surged forward, grabbing his mother around the waist and pulling her off of me. "Mom, stop it! Calm down!" he shouted, his voice high and panicked. He wrestled her back a few feet, pinning her arms. I lay on the rug, dizzy and struggling to pull air back into my chest, trying to scramble up and escape. The floor felt cold and hard beneath my cheek. My head throbbed instantly. The instant Daniel released her to check on me, she broke free and spun toward the fireplace. The large, heavy steel poker was leaning against the brick hearth, glinting under the harsh overhead light. She snatched it up. The poker looked impossibly heavy and long in her hands, transforming her from a screaming, middle-aged woman into a serious, immediate weapon. She did not hesitate, she lunged, raising the poker high above her head and swinging it down hard and fast, directly aimed at my arm, which I had instinctively thrown up to shield my face. It was a devastating strike designed to maim. Daniel roared. He threw himself forward, not at me, but at Millicent. His hand shot out and clamped around her wrist, catching the poker just inches from my skin. The steel was stopped with a jarring clang against the sound of his ragged breath. This pause, this split second where Daniel was focused solely on restraining his mother, was all the opportunity I needed. I didn't waste it. Survival instincts took over, overriding the lingering shock and pain. I scrambled up, pushing myself back onto shaky feet. I didn't try to reason or argue. I ran. I bolted out of the living room, down the small hallway, and burst through the front door, leaving Daniel still locked in a desperate, silent struggle with his mother over the weapon. Once I was outside on the manicured lawn, the cold night air hitting my face, I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking so hard I could barely unlock the screen. I mashed the buttons for the emergency services line. 911, what is your emergency? I need the police, I gasped, leaning against a decorative stone pillar by the door. My mother, In-law just assaulted me and tried to stab me with a fireplace poker. She's inside. She's crazy. I rattled off the address, repeating the street name twice to ensure the dispatcher got it right. I stayed on the line, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, watching the door. Daniel finally emerged, looking pale and sweating, locking the front door behind him. He walked straight toward me, his shoulders slumped. "Sam, I am so sorry," he started, his voice a ragged whisper. "I don't know what came over her. I pulled her off. I made sure you were okay." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a collaborator, an enabler, a liar. "The police are coming," I stated simply, ending the emergency call. Daniel's face went white. "Sam, no! My mom, she'll go to jail." It was self-defense. She was just angry. "She has security cameras," I pointed out, my voice flat. I had noticed them mounted high on the exterior walls when I first arrived. "They captured everything, Daniel. The assault, the poker, all of it. They'll show exactly who was angry, and exactly what she tried to do." We stood there in silence until the first cruiser's siren wailed in the distance. Millicent had been arrested by the time I finished giving my statement to the officers, who found her surprisingly compliant inside, sitting calmly on the sofa, waiting for them. She was charged with aggravated assault, facing years in prison. We drove home in silence again, only this time, the silence felt permanent. Back in our safe, quiet apartment, Daniel asked me about my arm, about my head. He tried to touch my shoulder, but I flinched away. I looked at the man who had promised to protect me, but had instead enabled my abuser and lied to me. He was the only thing standing between me and real, lasting security. I had to know absolutely where his loyalty lay. "Go," I told him, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm giving you an ultimatum. No contact with your mother ever again, or we are over. Forever. You have 24 hours to decide." That was yesterday. Now, the final clock was ticking down. The previous night had ended with me giving Daniel 24 hours to make the most impossible decision of his life. Now the time was evaporating. It felt like the air in the apartment was slowly being replaced by the cold, heavy dread of an approaching deadline. I moved through the morning with a strange, analytical calm, tending to the throbbing knot at the back of my head, a souvenir from my collision with Millicent's floor. My physical injuries were minimal, a few bruises, a deep ache. But the emotional injury was vast, a gaping, bleeding wound. I had always depended on control. My ultimatum to Daniel was an attempt to re-establish that control, to force the two remaining variables in my life, Daniel and his toxic mother, into a predictable, safe configuration. If he chose me, I won safety. If he didn't, I won freedom. 4 hours were left on the clock when my phone rang. The screen flashed, Millicent Taylor, inmate call. I didn't answer. I just watched it ring, a strange mixture of satisfaction and nausea churning in my stomach. She was where she belonged, dealing with the consequences of her own malice, while I was dealing with the consequences of Daniel's weakness. The voicemail indicator lit up immediately. I waited 10 minutes, cleaning the kitchen counter with an obsessive focus that masked my anxiety, before finally tapping the notification. Her voice, when it played through the speaker, was different. Gone was the high-pitched, manic fury of the previous night. It was low, tired, and steady. "Sam," she began, "I know things got out of hand. You are pressing charges, and that is what needs to happen. But before you marry him, you need to know the truth about my son. The real truth. The one that has nothing to do with me." I froze, the cleaning cloth slack in my hand. My blood ran cold, sensing a shift from domestic drama to something far more sinister. "You need to check his laptop," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp edge of urgency. "The password is his birthday backwards. Look for the folder labeled insurance. Don't ask why. You'll understand everything. I did what I did last night for a reason, but this is the real danger." The message ended with a click. I stood there for a long time, staring at Daniel's closed laptop, which sat innocently on his desk. My security analyst mind immediately began running threat calculations. This was a massive security breach, a violation of privacy. Opening the laptop, accessing his personal files, it was technically wrong. But Millicent's tone held a note of genuine desperation that was hard to ignore, and the words, "real danger," resonated deeply with my instincts. My primary rule had always been to eliminate threats, and if there was a deeper, hidden vulnerability, I had to patch it. I walked over to the desk, took a deep breath, and opened the laptop. The screen glowed to life, demanding a password. I typed in the 8 numbers of his birthday backwards. The laptop unlocked instantly. The easy access was unnerving. I navigated to his main document folder. There it was, right in the center of the screen, labeled in clean, unalarming letters. Insurance. It was a file name that screamed responsibility, stability, and future planning. My logical mind struggled with the instinct that told me to stop, to close the lid, to wait for Daniel. But I was Sam, the analyst, and I needed data. I clicked. The folder wasn't about insurance. It was about me. My hands started shaking immediately, a powerful tremor running right through my bones. The folder was filled with videos and photographs, dozens of them. All of me. I scrolled through the file names, the titles clinical and horrifying. Sam sleeping 2 months ago. Sam to showering May 9. Sam changing Sunday. They were dated over a span of 2 full years. A timeline that stretched back long before we were engaged, and even further back than the moment I gave him my first ultimatum about his mother. They were from angles that no person in a shared living space should ever have. The feeling of being watched, of being totally exposed in my most private moments, hit me with a force that made the room spin. The physical pain from Millicent's assault was nothing compared to this cold, absolute violation of my selfhood. My mind, trained to identify security flaws, immediately snapped to the realization hidden cameras. He had placed hidden cameras in our apartment. The nausea was overwhelming. I forced myself to keep scrolling, driven by the cold, professional need to assess the full scope of the breach. I needed to quantify the damage. Then I found another folder. It wasn't about me. It was labeled Mom's House. I clicked it open and saw videos of Millicent. Footage of his mother in her bathroom, in her bedroom. The same terrifying, intimate angles I had just witnessed of myself. The violation was not contained to me. Another folder, Sarah Cooper, Daniel's sister. The same thing. Another folder. Work, showing women. Female coworkers in a shared office bathroom. I stumbled back from the desk, clutching the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. The whole apartment seemed to tilt on its axis. Daniel wasn't just a weak fiancé or an enabler. He was a serial surveillance predator. Then I found the folder that changed everything, the one that explained the cold, clinical motivation behind the madness. It was labeled Sales. Inside were spreadsheets, usernames, chat log screenshots, and payment confirmations. Daniel had been selling these videos online for thousands of dollars. The file names were crude, objectifying, and specific. Asian girlfriend doesn't know she's being watched. New shower footage. The most recent sale listed was dated last night, a video of me from 3 days ago. The realization was a complete and total collapse of my reality. 3 years of my life, every moment of intimacy, every shared laugh, every time he said, "I love you," had been surveillance theater. I was never a partner. I was content. I was inventory. Just as the horror peaked, my phone rang again. It was Millicent. I answered this time, needing to know how she knew. "You looked," she said, her voice a low. "How did you know?" I whispered, my voice sounding strained and foreign. "I found the cameras 6 months ago," Millicent confessed. "In my own bathroom." I confronted him. He begged me not to tell anyone. Cried. Said he'd get help. I believed him. "Sam, he's my son. I thought I could fix him. Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, the adrenaline and violation hardening my voice. "He's my son," she repeated. But the tone was different now, heavy with shame. "But when I found out he sold videos of his own sister last month, I knew he would never stop. The racism was real. I am not a good person, Sam. But I was trying to drive you away. The worse I was, the more determined you were to stay. Last night, when you said you would leave him, I panicked. I heard the terrible logic in her terrible actions. You attacked me. I needed to get arrested." She admitted, her voice flat. "It was the only way to stop the wedding without revealing what he is. I couldn't let you marry him. The poker was never going to hit you. He knew that move. He'd seen me practice it in self-defense class. I telegraphed it on purpose. He caught my wrist exactly where I wanted him to. My mind raced, trying to process the cognitive whiplash. My abuser had staged her own arrest to save me from a sociopath. Then she gave me another, terrifying instruction. Check the external drive in his desk. Bottom drawer. Check the external drive in his desk. Bottom drawer. Millicent's instruction from the jail phone was precise, cold, and entirely terrifying. I was still reeling from the core violation of the insurance folder, the videos of me, his mother, his sister, and his coworkers all being sold for profit. The nausea still rolled through me in heavy waves. But my analyst mind was now fully engaged in threat assessment. I was looking at a pattern of behavior that was far bigger and far more entrenched than I had imagined. I dropped the phone on the bed and moved to Daniel's mahogany desk. I slid open the bottom drawer. It was filled with mundane office supplies, but tucked into the back, hidden beneath a stack of old magazines, was an innocuous-looking black external hard drive. It was small, slick, and completely unremarkable. I grabbed it. My hands were shaking violently as I plugged the drive into Daniel's laptop. It registered instantly. The screen populated with hundreds of folders, each labeled with a woman's name and a specific location. It was a terrifying catalog of victims. I scrolled through the list. My name was there, Sam, but the date stamp on the earliest file wasn't 2 years ago, when we had started dating. It was 3 years ago, a full year before we had met at the gym. My stomach dropped into a leaden pit. I had believed our meeting was a random, happy accident, a moment of fate that brought us together over the lat pull-down machine. The file logs proved otherwise. He hadn't just been recording me during our relationship, he had been stalking me before he even introduced himself. He had engineered our entire meeting. How many victims? I whispered into the phone, picking it back up and holding it tightly to my ear. Millicent's voice, filtered through the tinny jail connection, was ragged. Least 40 that I found. Some were underage. I think he had backups of everything. This is part of a network, Sam. He didn't just do this to us. The number 40 hit me like a physical blow. I was never special. I wasn't even the first. I was just the current, most marketable Asian girlfriend he could create content from. We need to call the police, I stated, my voice finally finding a steady edge of iron. I was no longer grieving the relationship. I was now planning the takedown of a criminal enterprise. I already did, Millicent said. This morning, after the hearing, before the guards took me to the main block. I had to wait until he couldn't stop me. I sent them everything. The laptop password, the location of the external drives, the security camera footage from my house, all the screenshots of his sales. Millicent, the racist woman who had terrorized me for years, had prepared a digital dossier and orchestrated her own arrest to ensure the safe delivery of the evidence. I was caught in a tangled knot of hatred and gratitude. They're waiting for my signal, she continued. They wanted to ensure you were safe before they moved in. Where is he now, Sam? I looked away from the horrific catalog on the screen and scanned the apartment, suddenly seeing our shared home through a security lens. Everything was a potential hiding spot. He texted me from work. I said, my voice low and controlled. But he has to be coming home soon. The 24-hour deadline is almost up. He needs to give me his answer. Check your tracking app, Millicent instructed. I opened the phone application we use to share locations with each other. A simple way to say, I'm on my way home. Daniel's icon showed him at my apartment building, a block away, not at his downtown office. Has been spoofing his location, Millicent said, confirming my growing fear. He didn't trust you. He watched you go to my house yesterday. Watched you come home alone. He knows exactly where you are and what you've been doing. He's here, Sam. He's right outside. A quiet, terrifying sound cut through Millicent's words, the distinctive click of a key turning in the lock. He's here, I whispered, the adrenaline flooding my system. The sound was too close, too real. Police are 3 minutes out, Millicent barked, suddenly sounding less like a heartbroken mother and more like a drill sergeant. Get to the bathroom, lock the door. Stay quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs, so loud I thought Daniel would hear it through the door. I threw the laptop screen down, letting the external drive dangle, and sprang off the desk. I heard his voice echo softly from the living room. Honey, we need to talk. I've made my decision about Mom. It was his loving fiancé voice, the gentle, reassuring tone he used when he was performing the role of my partner. It sent a chill of pure revulsion down my spine, knowing what I now knew. His footsteps were coming toward the bedroom, toward the open laptop that showed all his secrets, all his victims. I knew he would walk into that room, see the screen, and realize he was exposed. "I choose you?" he called out. "I'll never speak to her again." He was at the bedroom door. I flew into the bathroom and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaking hands. The tiny click of the lock sounded deafening. I pressed my back against the cold wood, trying to breathe quietly, my chest tight with terror. Millicent's voice was barely a whisper through the phone pressed to my ear. "Stay quiet. Stay put. They're 90 seconds away." Through the door, I heard Daniel pause. "Honey," he called out, that loving tone now laced with confusion. "Are you okay?" I stayed absolutely silent. The handle rattled. He was testing the lock. It rattled again, harder this time. Then silence. A heavy, terrifying 5 seconds of nothing. My stomach dropped as I realized what that silence meant. He had walked away from the bathroom. He was in the bedroom. He had seen the laptop. He had seen the open folders. He had seen everything I discovered about his crimes. Then, he shouted my name in panic. It was not the loving voice anymore. It was raw, desperate, and filled with the terrifying rage of an exposed animal. I heard things crashing in the bedroom, furniture scraping across the floor, probably him trying to destroy the laptop or the evidence. The apartment door crashed open with a terrifying, splintering sound, followed immediately by the thunder of heavy boots and shouts. "Police! Get down! Hands where we can see them!" I stood pressed against the bathroom door, my phone pressed to my ear, listening to Millicent's steady voice whispering instructions. "Stay inside. Wait for an officer to knock and identify themselves." The sounds of the struggle in the living room were loud and chaotic, more crashing, furniture scraping. Then, a sharp, clear voice began reading Daniel his rights. The terror slowly began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard sense of vindication. I was safe. The world had narrowed down to the cold porcelain tiles of the bathroom floor and the frantic, tinny voice of Millicent in my ear. I was standing in a 5-foot by 8-foot box, but my heart was pounding the rhythm of a 1,000-mile race. The adrenaline was so intense I could feel the hairs on my arms prickle. Daniel had just announced, "I choose you," which, in the horrifying context of the open laptop in the next room, meant nothing less than, "I choose to maintain my cover." He was committed to his performance right up until the last moment, trying to secure his content and his freedom. I stayed silent, my back pressed against the door, holding my breath, straining to hear over the rapid drumbeat of my own pulse. The moment of panic passed as the police flooded the apartment. I heard scuffling, loud shouts, and the heavy crash of furniture scraping across the hardwood floor. Daniel's voice rose above the din, screaming that this was a misunderstanding, that he could explain everything, that his mother had set him up. Millicent's voice came through the phone, steady as a buoy in a storm. "They have him. Stay there. Do not come out until an officer knocks and identifies herself." The sounds of the struggle faded, replaced by the crisp, measured tones of someone reading the Miranda rights. It was a bizarre, surreal soundtrack to the end of a 3-year lie. A few moments later, a gentle but firm knocking came on the bathroom door. "Mr. Sam, it's Officer Reyes. We're clear. You can come out now." My hands were still shaking violently. I had to use both of them to unlock the door. The female officer, tall and with a kind face, immediately placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, guiding me out. We walked past the living room, which was now a landscape of chaos: an overturned coffee table, a lamp lying shattered, and books scattered everywhere. Daniel was face down on the floor, his hands cuffed behind his back, 2 uniformed officers standing over him. As we passed, his eyes found mine. In them, I saw an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't love, but a raw, animalistic anger and betrayal. He had lost his control, and that was the only loss that mattered to him. I was part of the police action, an unforeseen variable that had wrecked his system. The officer led me into the kitchen, away from the scene of the arrest. My eyes swept the counter for any sign of a hidden device. I couldn't stop myself. Detective Harris arrived within 10 minutes. He was a middle-aged man with a wary competence that immediately inspired confidence. He sat me down at the kitchen table, which was still mostly clean, while other officers methodically began photographing everything, placing numbered markers next to objects, and bagging evidence. "Mr. Sam," the detective began, his voice low and direct, "we've been working on this case for 2 weeks, ever since Millicent Taylor first contacted us with concerns about her son. 2 weeks. The betrayal and the rescue were deeply intertwined. I need your statement now." he continued. Describe the files you found, the folder names, and the voicemail that led you to look. I spoke, but my voice sounded weird, distant, like it belonged to someone else. I described the videos, the Salus folder, the terrifying timeline of the stalking. I felt like I was recounting the plot of a terrible movie, not the history of my own life. Detective Harris confirmed that they had already secured warrants for the apartment, Daniel's workplace, and his car, all based on the mountain of evidence Millicent had provided from jail. They had been poised to move the moment they confirmed I was safe. Officers were now spreading out through the apartment. One came out of the bedroom, carrying the external drive I had unplugged, sealed in a clear evidence bag. Then, a moment that eclipsed all the others in pure, sickening dread. Another officer, one of the search team, walked out of the bathroom and signaled to Detective Harris. He looked at me, his face etched with such pity that I knew instantly what he had found. We found 4 hidden cameras in the apartment, Mr. Sam, Detective Harris confirmed softly. 1 in the living room, 1 in the bedroom, 1 disguised in the smoke detector in the hall, and 1 in the bathroom. The officer who discovered the bathroom camera kept his eyes down, but his pity was palpable. I had just been hiding in that small room, shaking and terrified, listening to Millicent guide my escape, and Daniel had been watching me the whole time. The violation hit me in massive waves, crashing through the cold, analytical calm I had maintained. He had been watching me, recording me, in my most private moments, right up until the second I locked the door. I thought back to the assault, the immediate rage that fueled my call to the police. I had told myself, my insane mother-in-law assaulted me and tried to stab me, so I'm ruining her life. But now, sitting here, seeing the evidence markers, realizing the depth of Daniel's calculated evil, I understood Millicent's final, desperate act was to ruin him, not herself. The racism, the cruelty, the assault. It was all a grotesque, complicated distraction designed to ensure that the police could take him out. I was a pawn in this twisted family drama, simultaneously abused and saved by the same person. Daniel was taken away in a police car while I was still trying to explain the contents of the Salus spreadsheet. The last thing I heard him shout was that his mother had set him up, and that I needed to understand this wasn't what it looked like. Detective Harris looked at me with genuine concern. Mr. Sam, this is a crime scene now. You can't stay here. You need a safe place tonight. I felt utterly helpless. My meticulously planned life was now a compromised location. I called my best friend, Marcus Harris, the software engineer who knew me better than anyone. He agreed to be there right away, his voice tight with alarm. Marcus arrived within the hour. His face went pale when I explained what had happened, his eyes darting between the police officers and the bagged evidence on the kitchen table. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer judgment. He just got a duffel bag and started packing clothes and toiletries from my drawers. He moved fast, grabbing essentials, avoiding my gaze, treating me like a fragile artifact that might shatter if spoken to. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I stared straight ahead, unable to process anything. My phone rang one last time. It was Millicent, still calling from jail. I answered, putting her on speaker for Marcus to hear. "Are you safe?" she asked. "Did the police arrest him?" I told her yes. They took him away in handcuffs about 20 minutes ago. Millicent was quiet for a long moment. Then she confessed the full truth of the past 6 months, repeating her story, finding the first camera, believing her son, trying to drive me away with her racism, and finally, realizing he was unstoppable when he targeted his sister. "I am sorry for not telling you sooner," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "I thought I could fix him. I spent those months choosing my son over his victims. I chose wrong, Sam. That choice cost you and Sarah months of safety, and for that, I am truly sorry." I felt sick listening to her, realizing I was dealing with a woman who had used me as a shield, who had abused me with slurs and mockery, but who had ultimately pulled the trigger on her own son to save me. I was grateful for the outcome, but the manipulation tasted like ash. We arrived at Marcus's apartment. He gently led me inside, helping me with the hastily packed bag. I collapsed onto his couch, and everything hit me at once. The rage, the violation, the fear. I started crying, not the quiet kind, but the ugly, shaking sobs that steal your breath. 3 years of my life was a lie. He had been watching me, recording me, selling me, and I hadn't known. Marcus just sat next to me and held me, letting me fall apart until I had nothing left. The intense weeping on Marcus's couch subsided into a dull, shaking numbness. I barely slept that night, my mind stuck in a loop of terror and betrayal. Every small noise in Marcus's otherwise quiet apartment made me jump. I found myself obsessively scanning the smoke detector, the air vents, and the clock radio, remnants of Daniel's violation already manifesting as full-blown hypervigilance. I knew it was crazy to check Marcus's place for cameras, but the insidious thought, if he did it, anyone can, had taken root. The next morning, Detective Harris called, asking me to come to the police station for a longer interview. He was compassionate but direct, acknowledging that I needed time to process the trauma, but also stressing the importance of solidifying the case. I needed to move from being a victim to being a crucial witness. Marcus drove me to the station and waited in the lobby while I was led into a small, windowless interview room. Detective Harris entered with another man in a dark suit, who introduced himself as Agent Yongku from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Yongku specialized in cybercrimes and online networks, and the presence of the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately confirmed the scope of Daniel's depravity. My case was not just a domestic assault and surveillance charge, it was part of something vast and organized. Detective Harris began by laying out the timeline. We found 4 hidden cameras in your apartment, Mr. Sam, just as we suspected. 2 in the living room, 1 in the bedroom, and yes, 1 in the bathroom. They were all linked to a cloud server through an encrypted network Daniel set up. Agent Yongwu then took over, turning a laptop screen toward me. It showed screenshots of chat logs from a private, encrypted website I'd never heard of. Daniel's username was there, alongside dozens of others, discussing eyes surveillance equipment, camera placement techniques, and eyes footage quality. He bragged about the technical sophistication of his setups and complained about victims who were too careful. He was treating my life, my privacy, and my body like technical specs in an engineering forum, reading his words about me, about other women, as if we were mere products in a catalog, made my stomach clench. I had to ask Agent Yongku to stop several times during the interview just to breathe and swallow down the nausea. The evidence kept coming. Detective Harris presented printouts of location data, maps covered in red dots showing places Daniel had been over the past 2 years. Mr. Sam, the detective explained, pointing to a cluster of red markers near my old apartment. The data shows Daniel started following you 14 months before you randomly met him at the gym. He tracked your routine. Your favorite coffee shop, your grocery store, the park where you jogged every Saturday morning. The realization hit me with terrifying force. He hadn't just recorded my relationship, he had engineered it. He positioned himself at the gym at the exact time I always worked out, near the equipment I always used. Our entire romance, every shared look, every compliment, every moment of perceived intimacy, was planned from the start like a psychological experiment designed for maximum content creation and eventual profit. Our relationship was never random or natural, it was a sick project. I stared at the red dots, a visible chart of a year of my life being carefully watched by a man whose name I didn't even know yet. I felt my hands shaking, the cold dread replaced by a slow-burning, righteous rage. This was worse than betrayal. It was the theft of my own life story. As the interview continued, the door opened, and Detective Harris gestured to someone in the hallway. A thin woman with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun walked in. She looked around my age, but her eyes held a wariness that made her look older. "This is Phoebe Leach." Detective Harris introduced her. "She's another victim. Daniel recorded her at their shared workplace 2 years ago." Phoebe sat down across from me. Her voice was steady, but her pain was evident. She explained that she found out about the videos during a company security review that discovered hidden cameras in the women's bathroom. Daniel, working in information technology, had access to install the equipment unquestioned. "The hardest part for me," Phoebe said, looking right at me, "was not knowing what was real anymore. Every conversation, every friendly interaction at work, was it genuine, or was it a performance for his camera? The constant second-guessing, the feeling that my entire life might have been stage-aged for his entertainment, made me feel crazy. Hearing her describe exactly what I was feeling, the hypervigilance, the loss of trust in my own memories, made me realize I wasn't losing my mind. This was the normal, awful reaction to this specific, calculated trauma. Phoebe offered to share what helped her navigate the legal stuff and the long recovery process, offering me a lifeline into a world I hadn't known existed, the world of coke survivors. A woman in a gray suit then walked in, introducing herself as Millicent Whitehead, the prosecutor assigned to the case. She spread papers on the table, detailing the charges: multiple counts of surveillance without consent, distribution of private images, stalking, and wire fraud for selling the videos online. "The evidence is overwhelming," Millicent stated with confidence. "We have the chat logs, the financial records, the devices, and the footage itself. But the legal process will take months. You will have to relive everything over and over. Court hearings, depositions, possibly a trial." She was honest about the difficulty ahead, but her promise to use the full weight of her office to support me was steadying. The final thing I had to deal with that day was the uncomfortable truth about my secondary abuser. Detective Harris returned to the topic of Millicent Taylor. "We have an odd situation here, Mr. Sam." Millicent's cooperation was critical. Without her initial report and the preservation of evidence, we might have lost some files. However, we found metadata suggesting she accessed folders containing videos of you on Daniel's computer at least 4 times over a 2-month period. The fresh wave of betrayal was immediate and sharp. Millicent hadn't just been slow to act. She had been watching me get violated for weeks before she made the choice to act, choosing her son and her secret over my safety. Even in her attempt to save me, she was manipulative and dangerous. Detective Harris asked if I had somewhere safe to stay. I confirmed Marcus was waiting for me. I walked out of the station with Marcus, feeling like a ghost, a witness to my own life being dismantled and cataloged as evidence. "I need to talk to his sister," I told Marcus the moment we were in his car. "I need to understand the family that created this." I sat across from Sarah Cooper in a quiet, bustling coffee shop near the police precinct, the strong scent of burnt sugar and espresso filling the air. This was the first time I had met Daniel's sister, the co-victim and immediate cause of his downfall since his arrest. She looked exhausted, haunted, the dark circles beneath her eyes telling a story of sleepless nights and absolute horror. "I'm so sorry, Sam," she said, her voice catching instantly. Tears streamed down her face before she could even take a sip of her latte. "For everything. For not knowing. For not protecting you or the others." I gently shook my head. "It's not your fault, Sarah. You were one of his victims, too." She told me about their mother. How Millicent had initially found the cameras 6 months ago, and how Daniel had broken down, begging her not to call the police, promising to change. Sarah confirmed the family's secret. Millicent chose her son's potential rehabilitation over his immediate victims. But the racism, Sarah confirmed, was real. Millicent genuinely disliked me for my heritage, making the situation an impossible tangle, where she was both a bigot who harmed me and a parent who ultimately tried to save me. Then, 3 weeks before the assault, Millicent had found the new external drive, the one with fresh videos of Sarah in her own apartment. That was when Millicent knew. Daniel hadn't stopped, he had just gotten sneakier. Sarah nodded when I asked if the assault was staged. She took self-defense classes for years. She knew how to make it look dangerous without actually harming you. The poker move was a trained block, and catch move Daniel had watched her practice. She orchestrated her own arrest so she could be in custody, separated from him, and finally tell you the truth without him stopping her. The cold realization hit me again. I was part of an elaborate theatrical performance, manipulated and saved by my abuser. She let me suffer through her racism and mockery for months, all while knowing her son was violating me in ways I couldn't imagine. She spent those months choosing her son over his victims. Sarah whispered, her eyes red with pain, and that choice came way too late to matter. I moved out of Marcus's place the following week and found a new apartment across town, deliberately choosing a neighborhood Daniel had never tracked me in. The landlord, a kind, middle-aged woman, listened to my broken explanation and installed extra locks before I even signed the lease. She gave me detection equipment the police had loaned me, a physical tool to combat the psychological dread. I spent 2 hours scanning every corner, every outlet, every smoke detector. Marcus stayed with me the whole time, patient and silent, while I obsessively checked and rechecked. My safety was now a choice, a vigilance I had to maintain. My first few weeks of recovery were a blur of legal meetings and crushing emotional work. I started seeing Dr. Helen Sato, a therapist recommended by the victim advocate. She specialized in surveillance trauma. She didn't treat me like I was broken. She validated my reactions. The constant checking, the jumping at sounds, the feeling of being watched. She called it SARS hypervigilance and explained that my brain was trying to protect me from the next violation. My second session with Dr. Sato broke me completely. I tried to explain how I couldn't tell which memories were real, whether any moment we shared was genuine love or just as content for a sale. Dr. Sato let me sob for 10 minutes before she said something that shifted everything. Your feelings were real, Sam, even if his weren't. You are allowed to grieve the relationship you thought you had, the future you believed you would build. The violation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. You must mourn both losses separately. The legal process moved forward. Daniel's defense attorney tried to argue for bail, but Millicent's final piece of evidence, spyware found on my phone that tracked my location in real time, convinced the judge that Daniel remained a flight risk and a continued threat. The judge ruled that he would stay locked up until trial. The relief was immense, but the terror was immediate. Even from jail, he had been trying to keep tabs on me. Phoebe, the co-victim from Daniel's workplace, reached out and invited me to our support group for surveillance victims. I almost refused, but the isolation was worse than the embarrassment. Walking into that room and seeing 8 other women who knew exactly what I was going through was a profound shift. I wasn't alone anymore. They understood the specific violation of having your privacy commodified. We were split on the question of Daniel's plea deal. Millicent Whitehead, the prosecutor, called to say Daniel's attorney was offering 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. Phoebe argued for taking the plea to avoid the trauma of a public trial. Sarah insisted he deserved maximum punishment. We debated for 3 hours, a room full of people whose lives Daniel had stolen, trying to reach a consensus on justice. After days of agonizing with Dr. Sato, I called Millicent and told her I supported the plea, but only if Daniel admitted to every crime without minimizing or blaming mental illness. I wanted him to say out loud that he understood the harm, that he knew it was violation, and that he chose to do it anyway for money and power. 2 weeks later, on the day of the plea hearing, all 15 of us showed up to deliver our West victim impact statements. I walked to the podium with my notes, my hands shaking. I spoke about the hypervigilance that forced me to check every room for hidden cameras. I talked about the loss of safety and the calculated theft of my life story. I focused on the truth. He turned my most private moments into products for sale. When I sat down, Phoebe went next, then Sarah, then the other 12 victims. We each added our voice to the story he had created. Then it was Daniel's turn. He stood at his podium, wearing an orange jumpsuit, and read from a prepared, emotionless statement. He listed the places he installed cameras: my apartment, his sister's home, workplace bathrooms. He confirmed that he sold the footage for profit. He confirmed that he knew it was wrong. His voice was flat, devoid of any genuine feeling. It confirmed what I already knew. We were never people to him. We were ASA content. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison, mandatory sex offender registration for life, and lifetime prohibition on surveillance equipment. The relief was mixed with a strange emptiness. Justice was achieved, but the violation was still permanent. The video still existed somewhere. I walked past Millicent outside the courthouse. She was near the steps, trying to catch my eye, but I kept moving toward Marcus's car. Millicent, the woman who had both tormented and saved me, now existed in a space I wasn't ready to process. 4 months after the arrest, I finally found my purpose. Phoebe and I started the nonprofit, focused on surveillance victim advocacy and hidden camera detection education. We taught workshops showing people how to check for cameras in smoke detectors and wall outlets, how to secure their digital lives. Every workshop brought more people, more stories of cameras found and dangers avoided. The work was exhausting, but it filled me with a purpose that transcended my trauma. Helping others protect themselves gave meaning to what I had survived. I started dating 6 months after the arrest. James, a kind, patient man my friend introduced me to, knew everything about my history. Our first date was me checking his apartment for cameras. He handed me his lens detector without making a joke. I scanned every room while he made tea, giving me the space to feel safe. Finding nothing didn't cure the anxiety, but his patience helped. When he reached for my hand, he asked first. That small gesture of consent made my eyes water. Dating after surveillance was relearning how to trust my own judgment about people. Dr. Sato showed me a chart tracking my anxiety levels over 6 months. The hypervigilance was decreasing. I was sleeping better in my secured apartment, sometimes making it through entire nights without waking up to search for blinking red lights. Healing wasn't linear, but it was real. The trauma wasn't gone, Dr. Sato reminded me, but it was no longer sitting in the center of my life, taking up all the space. It had moved to the edges, where I could function around it instead of through it. A year after the arrest, I sat in the nonprofit office Phoebe and I shared, reviewing applications for our next workshop series. My phone buzzed with a text from James asking what time I would be home for dinner. He knew everything, and he respected my boundaries. The cameras stole something from me that I'll never fully get back, my absolute sense of unearned privacy. But they also showed me what I'm capable of. I'm not the person I was, but I'm stronger now, more vigilant, and more purposeful. I'm reclaiming my safety one careful day at a time, building something protective rather than destructive from the wreckage of a lie.